All right, so today's lesson is on something called IK versus FK. And to help us define what those terms actually are and how to work with them, we have our Norman rig. Norman is a rig that was created by some people that worked at the Pixar University. He leaked online for a while, but now he is legal to use for educational purposes. So for anyone who wants to needs a rig for their demo reel, or any educational purposes that are non-commercial, you can find this rig online very easily, and he's a very good rig. All right, so IK versus FK. FK stands for forward kinematics. Now, what does that mean? Well, forward kinematics, if we look here at our legs, forward kinematics is the idea that, and as we've discussed before, the top of the joint chain is sort of the head honcho, and these other joints follow. And then if I move the knee, you can see that the ankle and toe and everything else follow, but the hip does not, right? So we're going forward down the joint chain. Pretty simple concept. That's just simply how joints work. There are some times, though, where actually that can be problematic, and we might want to change that order of things. The biggest, most obvious specific example being, what if I want to make Norman walk? If I want him to, take a step to here and leave his other foot behind. Well, first step, I would need to move his hips to be halfway in between these spots, right? So if he's got one foot here and one foot here, hips are halfway in between. So I move them halfway in between. And I'm also going to move them down a little bit, because if you're walking and your feet are that far apart, then your hips are technically lower to the ground. And already you can see one problem, right? This foot didn't stay where it was. It followed behind, right? Now, I hadn't really done anything special with it, but what if I had? All right, so now I'm going to move using rotations on these joints. I'm going to try and put his foot where that bar is, right? So as if he's taking a step down. If I look in my side view, I've actually got his foot vertically where it's supposed to be. Horizontally, however, that's not where I wanted his leg to be. So let's say I want to change it. I actually want his foot to be a little bit further forward. Well, I can't pull his foot forward, right? I have to rotate the knee a little bit and maybe rotate the ankle, but now his foot's off the ground, so I need to move this and all of that for, oh, wait a minute, I don't want his leg to be that straight, so I need to push his hips down. And as soon as I do, his feet fall down through the ground. And you can imagine trying to animate an entire walk cycle like this, where every time you moved his hips, his feet left the ground. Kind of impossible, right? So while forward kinematics is perfectly fine for a lot of situations, this isn't one of them, right? What we want to be able to do is actually sort of take this foot joint. We want to be able to take this foot joint and pull it, right? Wouldn't that be nice? I could just pull this foot joint to here and everything else followed. And that would be what's called inverse kinematics. All right, so we have here a slightly different version of the Norman rig, and I want to show you what IK is practically first before I describe what it is technically doing to all these joints, right? So you can see that there's no control for the hip or the knee anymore. There's just one for the foot. And what I can do now is I click on the foot, and instead of rotating something, I just bring up my move tool. And you can see I can move his foot. And also, very importantly, if I move his hips, see how this other foot stays put? These are the two problems that IK solves, right? One is that it lets me move this joint a bit more intuitively for this particular kind of motion. Now, if he was swimming or had his legs swinging on a swing set or off the edge of a bench, that would be different. I would need control over these two joints specifically for the rotations. But if I'm walking a character, he's planting his feet, right? There's no reason why I should have to manually figure out on my own what joint should be rotated by what amount, right? So now I only have to worry about 3 controls, right? These 2-foot controls. 2-foot controls and hip controls, right? Now, obviously, I could put a bend in these feet and things like that. But for right now, we're just concentrating on the leg where the IK is, right? So this is what inverse kinematics allows you to do. Intuitively move the end of the joint chain, right? Instead of, my hip is no longer controlling where my foot goes. I'm pulling on the end of the joint chain and the top of it is following. All right, so what does this mean technically? Technically what I'm doing, and I've got my FK joints up on this leg so we can see them. Technically what I'm doing is I'm reversing the kinematics of these particular joints, right, from the hip to the ankle. What I'm doing is I'm taking the usual flow whereby the hip tells these where they should start and then the knee tells the ankle where it should start, and I'm reversing that engineering, right? I'm saying instead, I'm going to tell the ankle where to go. I'm going to pull that up like that. And Maya, using math and trigonometry, Maya is going to look at where the ankle is, and then it's going to use geometry and trigonometry to calculate what this joint should be rotated as and what this joint should be rotated as, right? Because these joints are not stretching. So Maya's saying, okay, if this ankle is here, then this has this rotation and this has this rotation. If I move the ankle way out here, right? Well, now I've changed that triangle, right? I've changed this triangle so that now this has a different rotation and this has a different rotation, although these 2 lengths of the triangle are the same, right? So Maya is doing calculations for us instead of me sitting here figuring out, okay, if my foot has to go here, I have to rotate this one X degrees and this one X degrees. That takes too long. Okay, so here we have some disembodied legs that we can work with to test some IK stuff. And right now they are in forward kinematics, purely. When you have just joints on a rig, that's what you have, right? Hip joint leads all these other joints, and actually this root joint I have at the top, which would be where the back is on a person, right? That controls everything. I can't, move this ankle. I mean, I can, but obviously that's going to just stretch the joint, and we don't want that. Let's see, there we go. Put that back to where it goes. Okay. So what we want to do is place something on this joint chain that from the hip to the ankle actually reverses the mechanics. And that tool is called the IK tool, IK handle tool actually. And we're going to go into the options and say solver enabled, snap enabled. We'll turn sticky on. And the other thing we're going to do is there's a couple different solvers. When you are doing your rig proper, you're going to want to use the rotate plane solver. So we're going to put that on here so you can see what it looks like. And you're going to click from the top part of the joint chain you wish to affect, which in the legs would be the hip, down to the joint that you want to be able to move this chain from, which in this case is the ankle. So I clicked on the hip first, then the ankle, and when I did that, you only get to click twice. You get all these different colors and a lot of different stuff. So let's dissect this here. I was talking before about Maya doing trigonometry, and you can actually see the triangle that is being used to process this, right? This triangle here is the math that Maya is solving for. This circular bit up here with this triangle, that's what makes it a rotate plane solver. We will get into that with the proper rig, but basically the purpose of that is to be able to point the knee wherever you need to. So it is important to keep that there. If you use the other type of solver, the single chain solver, you won't be able to do that. At least not like that. If I click off this for a second, it all turns brown, right? So you can see the joints that are being affected by this are brown. That's Maya telling you there's something different. And you can actually notice that the ankle is not. Because while the handle that we're pulling to manipulate things, right? If I move this handle, and you translate IKs, you don't rotate them. If I move that handle, you can see it rotates this joint and this joint. But the ankle itself, the ankle joint, if I'm careful and I click just that, that's still free. Which is good because I need to be able to rotate the ankle however I want when I'm walking my character. Right? So we've technically, if we zoom in real close, we've got a couple of different things working right in the same area. If I select the joint, which you can see in my hypergraph, then I can rotate, not along that axis, the ankle itself, right? But this weird stick thing coming out here, that's the IK handle. It's listed as such in your hypergraph. And that is the part that we translate. That is the part that you move to get your foot going. Now you can also see that there is a bit of a little red circular bit in there. And if we go over to the hypergraph, you can see that that's this part right here. That's called the effector. We'll get more into that later, but that's basically where Maya's math is ending. So you can see there's two different new things added to your hypergraph. The IK handle is sort of separate, right? It's not part of this chain right here, at least not now. And it's the effector that you can see here. It's technically parented here underneath the knee joint, right? Because it's on the ankle, so it's underneath the knee. And then it's leading back up to the hip. You can see this red line. That's sort of Maya's way of saying, you know, inversing the kinematics. It's also got a little symbol right here to tell you that I believe that's talking about the joints. But so you got a few things added to your hypergraph to complicate things a little bit. But what's nice is that it's easy to tell what's FK and what's IK now, right? I can individually rotate this knee all I want, right? Because it's FK. I cannot do the same to this knee. I could sit there all day with my rotate tool. I can't rotate it. Like, it's locked off to whatever Maya solves for. And those are the proper terms. You want to make sure to understand Maya is solving this joint's rotation and this joint's rotation for you. That's why it's easier to use. And that's whether you pull this right here, right? Or if I move the hip, right? And you can see, now if I move it too much, it just stretches. There we go. The ankle is staying in place. Don't worry about the foot going under there. We've solved that in the rig itself. But the idea is that this handle stays put while I move the hip, where this foot just kind of does whatever. It's following this hip joint, right? Now I'm making it sound like FK is all bad. It's not. I will say that for arms, you will almost always use forward kinematics. IK on arms can lead to very bad animation unless you have some very specific reason to use it. So don't like the fact that this makes walking easier, make it seem like everything should be IK. It shouldn't be. Okay, so a couple more technical things to keep in mind for IKs. First of all, those options that you saw when we first went up here to make the IK, you can change a lot of those after effect. I wouldn't do it when you're really through your rigging, but if you just placed the IK handle and realized, for example, that the foot is not staying in place, that attribute is, we click here on the IK handle, and you go into your attribute editor. These things are all mostly going to be found under IK handle and IK solver. So if we click IK handle, you can see that stickiness is turned off, so we can just turn that back on. Another thing we can do is under the IK solver attributes, you can switch back and forth between RP and SC solvers. So for example, if you had made this an SC solver, you know, you can maybe change it back to a rotate plane solver. You need to be careful though. As you can see here, when I changed it this way, you can see what it did to the foot. This is what happens when you start getting into solvers and things that Maya calculates for you. Sometimes things do not work out all that well, and just deleting it does not fix your problem because now your joint is still all contorted and crazy. So you got to make sure that you're paying attention to your rig as you're clicking on these things, that you're saving often, and that you're doing a save as very often where you save it as a new file name, you know, blah 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 number 2, blah 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 number 3, because in rigging sometimes you can break things irrevocably and you might not notice until it's been a little bit. So be careful of that. Another technical thing to be careful of is that usually when we're rigging, we talk about zeroing things out. So in other words, if I was testing something with these joints, ooh, that's a problem. I would want all of my joints to be at 0. That might be why I was having a problem on the other leg, right? You want everything to be zeroed out with joints. That means rotates. These translates don't really matter. Before you put down any kind of thing on these joints. The IK handle, though, is a bit stubborn. It doesn't start zeroed out. I can't, if I put these here, 0 is the origin point. So it can be a little bit problematic. Just keep that in mind, that you can't just reset these back to 0. So undo will be your friend, saving often will be your friend. Okay, one last thing, technically, to keep in mind. Some of you may have, I don't know, tails or large antennae or something on your characters. And IK may seem like a very good solution for that. Hey, I can just select the end of the tail and move it wherever I want, except there's a couple of limitations to that. First of all, you can only bend it in the one direction. So if this was a character's tail, I really hope you only needed to curl down and not up or something like that, because that's all you're getting. And the other thing you can't do is you can't control how much each of these joints is bent, right? I can't put like not much of a curve on this part of the tail and really I want the end of the tail to curve or something like that. I can't do that with an IK. It's not specific. It gets unwieldy once you get past 2 joints, right? So I've got a hinge joint in the knee that I can control pretty well with the IK just across that in the hip, but when you get to all, spine or tail, things like that, this is not the solution. Because the other problem you can end up with is this one here, where you can see these joints are rotating in one direction and these joints are rotating in another. That's the trade-off. Maya does some of the work for you, but you are a little bit stuck with what they have. So IK is a great solution for legs, but this tool is not the solution for a back or tails or things like that. Actually, the simple solution we have for the back and this rig will be okay for things like that. Alright, so just keep that in mind before, don't start putting IKs on all of the appendages of your character, because their antennae aren't going to move the way you want them to.